UFO Channel.
Nothing could be more tranquil than the English countryside, here on the Durham-Northumberland border. I was contacted not long ago by a gentleman who told me about the death of a sheep not far from where I'm standing. Nothing unusual about that, you might think. The ewe had died during the process of giving birth to a lamb. It was found with the lamb's head protruding from its body. The following morning, when the farmer went to retrieve the carcass, she was horrified to discover that the head of the lamb was missing, and a portion of skin and flesh had been removed from the left jaw and face of the ewe. The injuries were unlike those made by a predator, and appeared to have been carried out with surgical precision. I'd heard about strange mutilation of cattle in the United States in the past, and decided to find out more about cases here in the UK. I started by contacting an organisation called the Animal Pathology Field Unit, who are a group of researchers that investigate strange animal deaths throughout the United Kingdom with the intention of finding a plausible explanation. So what is the modus operandi of these bizarre animal deaths? David Caton provided me with a list of injuries which are commonly found. The side of the head and jaw is completely and cleanly stripped of all flesh, skin and hide, usually on the left side of the head.
Usually, always, not say always, but often the left side. So the animal's found lying on its right side, and there's a very neat strip round from the ear and the eye, right down to the nose very often, and back on the lower jaw, where all the skin and tissue is removed very cleanly from the bone. So the bone is pristine. It's like people have described it in the States as though the animal's been dead for months, laid out in the desert, being picked clean by coyotes and so on, and birds, and left to bleach in the sun. Some time ago I'd have a conversation with a chap who worked in an abattoir down in South Wales, and he said to do that, which is difficult in an abattoir, we would have to use high pressure steam and very hot steam to clean all the flesh without trace off a bone, to leave it in that sort of condition.
One or both ears are cleanly removed. The tongue is removed from the root, or often a slightly angled cut which removes a small slice down from the tip.
If you cut your tongue, you bite your tongue, and you're living, you bleed like heck. And it's very messy. And apart from, I have one picture where it suggests that the lamb was still alive when the tip of the tongue was sliced off, because it's quite bloody around its mouth. But all the others, there's no blood whatsoever, which is indicative of the animal being obviously dead before that particular slice was cut away from the tongue.
Right. So do you think that they're cutting part of the tongue off in order to extract blood, or have you got a thought on why they remove the tongue or part of the tongue?
Yeah, well, yes, it has been suggested to me by a lady who works in a pathology lab in Birmingham Hospital, who said that the tongue, the health of the animal, and even human beings, can be judged quite well by the state of the tongue. Right. And when you go to the GP and you're feeling off colour, and often the first thing they say to you is, stick your tongue out. Right. And they look at your tongue. Right. So it might be that the tissue from the tongue would tell the people who are removing these organs about the general health of the animal, which could be important.
One or both eyes are removed. Neat circular holes drilled through the centre of the skull. Brain material is extracted via these holes. On the head and neck, 1 to 2 inch diameter shallow scoops through the skin with just a few millimeters of flesh removed. Inside these areas, smaller 1/4 inch diameter deeper holes can be found. Organs removed from the throat, such as the larynx and esophagus. A pair of small puncture wounds an inch apart in the ventral neck area, from which 100% of blood volume is extracted. There is no explanation of how this can be achieved.
If you cut yourself badly and you're bleeding, when about 60% of your blood is lost, then the heart stops and you die. Because the cardiovascular system apparently collapses then, and that's the end of you or the animal. So the big mystery is what happens to the other 40-odd%, and how is that removed without the heart acting as a pump, you know, to pump it out. So some very sophisticated external apparatus must be being brought to bear to do that.
Neat-edged, circular and teardrop-shaped holes in the abdomen from which all or some of the major organs are removed. There is no explanation as to how large organs are removed through these small holes.
Holes are cut into the body, and organs and tissues are cleanly removed from quite, you know, big organs from quite small holes.
Excision of reproductive organs. Neat-edged holes in the rectal area, which are cored out to a depth of 5 to 6 inches. Cows may have complete excision of the udder or just missing teat portions. Decapitations and limb or tail amputations. The severed items are never found. Complete or partial removal of the internal organs. Usually other animals will not scavenge from these carcasses, and other animals grazing in the same field will keep well clear of the dead animal.
Well, we're all, I suppose, after the same basic truth of what's going on and finding the evidence and examining the evidence. Phil has latterly decided to trawl an area east of Shrewsbury and down to the Welsh borders, farm by farm, in a sort of grid pattern in a way, because it's quite clear there seems to be an area of high activity. And I think he's done like over 100 farms so far. One farmer, his father, who was in his 80s, said, "Well, we've been having this trouble since 1954.
A lot of these cases are in small pockets. It seems to be that the Ree Valley area has got an intensity, and we find that in other parts of the country. It doesn't seem to be the complete country that's active, it seems to be certain areas. But what reasons that would be, we're not quite sure at the moment.
So this is an area on the English-Welsh border called the Ree Valley.
That's right.
And there's another valley nearby called the Hope Valley.
That's right, that runs parallel to it. But those particular areas are extremely active, and obviously there's been a lot of animal mutilations detected and also missing animals in that area over the past 10 years. The majority of these mutilations do take in very isolated areas, and on hill farms in particular.
Another active location is an area within Dartmoor. Mike Freebury explains.
This is an attack map of the Dartmoor sheep killings, and each dot represents an attack. Sometimes there's 7 victims, sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's only 1. But it's a very, very small area. You've got here Pork Hill leads up. This is the main B3357 that leads to Princetown, and this area here, where the majority of attacks have taken place, is no more than half a mile square.
So we'll target areas of known activity and then go around in a pre-organised search pattern, calling on farms to explore if they've had any unusual animal deaths or disappearances.
We do know that on one occasion a victim was taken from a field over here and transported to the killing area where it was mutilated and killed.
It's referred to as animal mutilation, but that's probably a very misleading term.
Yes.
Can you explain why?
It's a complete misnomer, because the word mutilation conjures up in people's minds a vision of a poor animal torn to pieces and blood everywhere and being a mess, which is what often happens when a natural predator obviously attacks an animal to eat, which is a natural process. So but these are very clinical, medical type procedures.
David gives an example of one of these medical type procedures.
I reckon, as they were walking up the field, with yards from the farmhouse one evening back home, his younger daughter said, "Oh, Daddy, look at this little lamb here, dead." And he'd got this rather interesting teardrop-shaped hole on its left hindquarters.
Okay.
So, having got the children back to the farm and tucked away, he went back and took some pictures and contacted me and sent them to me. But that is a very, very interesting image because it shows this particular shape of hole, which I found subsequently on a abdomen of a ram in West Wales, which I will show you the images later.
Right.
And the smooth edges again, and how they, for about a half-inch area around this teardrop-shaped hole, which was, you know, quite big,
Yes.
was cleaned away just to the bare skin, so all the fur and everything, as though it had been prepared for surgery.
A misconception to think that the animals have been attacked or viciously wounds inflicted upon them. That's not the case. When the farmers normally detect that the animal is obviously been killed, the first examination they sometimes feel, oh, it's been killed by a fox or a badger. Sometimes animals have been clinically killed, and then a predator might come in and have an easy meal and contaminate the evidence. But a lot of times things aren't touched at all by predators. Predators keep away. Now these are surgical procedures. They are clinical removal of the tongue, the jaw strips, and also circular incisions around the groins and reproductive organs. So these are highly clinical, precise removal of tissue and organs.
Because one of the highlights of animal mutilation cases is that the tongue is invariably removed, and usually by a smooth cut to the back of the mouth. So she went to check the body and came back and said, all the blowflies are dead. There's piles of them in the back of my car, in the back of her Land Rover.
Okay.
And I've actually got a photograph of that.
Okay. So something was possibly put on the body or done to the body which killed the flies which were...
Killed the predators.
Okay.
And it is not consistent with any predatory attack that we can determine at all.
And quite often drained of blood too.
Well, the blood seems to be missed in the context. It's not on the carcass, or very little, and it's not on the ground. On a number of cases, I've examined carcasses of ewes, which are quite big animals, and they've had substantial removal of tissue, and there's not even one single drop of blood on the ground, and the farmer even made that comment. There should be blood everywhere. If you've opened up major arteries and removed organs and tissue, there should be blood all over the carcass, and it's like the carcass is dry.
And the blood is itself removed as well, and there's no trace.
There is an indication that in many cases the blood is removed. There's also evidence from the US that the blood might also have been actually altered, that actually the blood plasma has been broken down and separated off into its components, and the actual substance of the blood, in a number of cases in America, has actually been found in a type of black putty or paste upon the carcass. We've actually detected that also in the Ree Valley.
And another case where an unwanted item was left behind.
Where the one ear had gone completely, the tag, which is sealed, which when the animal has it clamped to like an earring,
Yes.
they're clamped and there for life.
Right.
And it takes a lot of force to unclamp them. You damage and destroy the tag in doing that, as the farmer explained to Phil and I. And there is the tag lying on the ground alongside the carcass of the animal, completely undamaged,
Right.
and there's no evidence of tissue or blood around it.
Right.
So that's a...
And was the ear damaged? Was the ear cut so that could have been removed?
Well, probably the ear was totally missing.
Right. Oh,
So-
the ear was completely missing.
Yeah, but they've gone to the trouble of removing
The plastic
the
tag.
plastic tag as though this was some problem to them. They didn't want that.
Yes.
But how it's been removed is a mystery in itself.
David points out similarities with other cases from around the world.
This is a classic cow mutilation comparable to the States, which again came from Tony Dodd in the States from 1995 in Newry, and it's got a complete excision of the udder. Also, there was excision of the vaginal area at the back and the rectum, and it also had jaw strips and the classic stuff, tongue gone and what have you. But what's
Was the blood removed?
well, presumably it looks pretty bloodless, I would say, but as you can see possibly on there, the jaw strip from underneath. And then if I compare these two images. This is a cow in the States. Not sure from me, but I think it might be Alabama or somewhere. But also has had the udder removed. Slightly larger excision area, but the same sort of thing with the clean edges and a circular sort of thing. So there we are, thousands of miles apart.
Phil Hoyle examines a mutilated lamb in the Ree Valley.
That the tongue has been cut clean off, and you can see inside. You can see inside the blood. The tongue has been, you can see, it's been cleanly, sharply removed. A number of inches from the end. One eye, is it just the right eye?
Yeah.
Just the right eye is gone. There's also some sort of opening to the...
Have you got that, Phil?
Yeah. Hang on. As we've viewed this, clean incision. Yeah, clean incision there above the right thigh, hindquarter, into the rectal area. All the rectal area is surgically, the whole cavity is totally empty. Yeah, totally empty. Obvious inaccessibility by road to this area.
David Caton reports on a case from the Severn Estuary where a large number of sheep were mutilated.
There was reports initially of 40 injured animals, 16 dead. This happened on...
And the location is on the Severn Estuary, on the Forest of Dean side. So you're on the northern side of the estuary between Lydney and Chepstow. And across the river, just a mile and a quarter direct, is the Albury-on-Severn nuclear power station, which I think might be interesting, because the farmer just threw in a sort of a conversation that local people around him had been notified that they were soon to be dished out iodine tablets, which suggests there'd been a sort of radiation leak from the power station, which could affect people, you know, and lower your red corpuscle count and all the rest of it, which is disturbing in itself. But, so he brought them in from this location about 2 miles away, because the farmers rent fields out to each other. So the field where it was, which was like between the estuary, which is tidal there was a railway track. So it was like a 300-yard wide strip, about 3/4 of a mile long, and that was the field contained by the river. So the only access was off two other farmers' fields to cross the railway crossing to get onto that strip of land. And that's where he found them after a night of torrential rain. So it was boggy, windy. The farmer, Willie Guest, said, "I wouldn't like to have been out there." So the suspicion was, and this was reported on the television news from Bristol, that some people with firearms and dogs possibly had walked up the railway track, gone into the field, somehow herded the animals together. This is in the dark, mind you, in a wet, horrendous night, and shot with a low caliber rifle the animals in the heads, which turned out to be absolute nonsense. But because the police were informed, they were duty obliged, I suppose, to follow up this line of inquiry, because firearms had been suggested to be used. So the RSPCA attended, apparently, a big cat expert, a fellow called Danny Bamping from the British Big Cat Society, who declared, so the farmer told me, to the TV camera people, crew who were there, that it was not the work of big cats, and he disappeared. The RSPCA were mystified and were more interested in making a plug for the public watching the TV news to get funds for the RSPCA, which is what they do. So the farmer was absolutely fuming about it because he's lost all his animals with no real explanation. So the CID came back in, we happened to meet two of them, and a vet from a practice in Chepstow, a lady called Jane Glover Hill, appeared, armed with a big knife, to detach the heads of 4 of the animals and take a whole one, which I helped her in the car boot with, back to the veterinary practice to conduct some radiography on the heads to look for evidence of lead shot.
Right.
And
was there any evidence
no,
of lead shot?
absolutely none at all. Clean as a whistle.
And did these have any of the mutilation signs? Any of the 14?
Yes, in a sense. When I heard of this, I rang the TV people in Bristol, who gave me the name of the farmer. So I rang him, said I'm in Manchester, 200 miles odd away, and said, did any of the animals in this big heap on his tractor have a jaw strip? Yeah. And he said, oh yes, I think you're right, they did. So I said, can you go and check to see if the tongue is missing? Right. So he said, oh, okay. So he put the phone down, and after about, I don't know, half an hour, he came back on the phone to me and said, absolutely amazed, he said, you're right, the tongue's missing. So he thought, how do I know, 200 miles away, I haven't clapped eyes on these animals, know that the tongue was missing, because you've got to force the jaw open to see that, because rigor mortis starts to set in, which makes it hard to open the jaw. So he was really intrigued. So that was enough. She invited me and Robert to go back with him to Chepstow before we headed back up north, while they did some of the radiography. So and that proved that firearms were not used categorically. But she found some very interesting wounds, and these were crushing injuries, lots of them on the head and the jaw, and the nasal bone down the front of the animal was sort of splintered. There was no other damage elsewhere. There was no rectal coring, no other body parts affected. It was all the head and the neck.
So it seems that sometimes they're just interested in the head end, and did they take the soft tissue organs from the throat and the esophagus?
No.
So, okay.
There was neat shallow holes, one under the jaw in the centre, one of the sheep. They all had a mixture. I mean, some had no injury at all, but the farmer said often they're stressed. Sheep are very prone to dropping dead with a heart attack. Right. So something stressed them out. This is the jaw strip, which is similar but different in some respects to the other animals elsewhere. But we found holes behind the ears. When you pull the ears back, there were these holes in the skin which had some depth. And then across there was a particular black one, which I'll turn to, this one, which had a diagonal strip of the tongue, there and there, and then little holes in the side of the face, and then by accident, by pulling the carcass about, which I found there was a split between the ears across the crop of the skull, which looked like a neat cut, but when I pulled the skin back, it revealed, I think, the top of the cranium. Right. And the side under the ears, these larger holes, there was a smaller hole in the centre, or not necessarily in the centre, but within this hole. Right. Now, this photograph with the head detached, Jane Glover Hill discovered, with dissection I guess eventually, that these two holes were in the side of the head, a bit similar to the lamb from Shropshire, but deeper, within the bigger hole. Right. And she found they seemed to line up, and she actually passed an implement through from one side to the other, which was a knitting needle actually, which she suggested a clamping device had been forcibly, and a lot of force, she said, would have been applied to press these two appeared to be blind holes, but diametrically opposite each side of the head. And then this had missed the top of the brain that came out the other side. Albeit, she did say, in death, the brain shrinks a modicum, which leaves a bit of a gap between the brain and the top of the skull, if you see what I mean. But that clearly was not done by a bullet. The main thrust of it was to eliminate firearms, and that's really all they were interested in doing. That was the veterinary practice's brief, to eliminate the firearms. And once that was done, the police lost interest. The case was closed. So nobody had any answer to it, basically. And farmers have said to me more than once, for you to catch an animal, particularly in a herd, I mean, they have difficulty getting one to give it some treatment, you know, an injection or something, or do something to its foot, you know. And that's why they say we have sheepdogs to help us do it.
Yeah.
Now, to round them up, they herd them into a small area where they were found. There's some pictures taken by the big cat mine, which I've got from the farmer, shows like where they were laying, actually covered in mud and slime. You know, they were a mess. So that you can imagine the pitch dark in the rain, terrible rain, wind blowing a gale. The sheep will be jostling about to be able to go in there with a firearm, with a rifle of some sort, to keep them steady, to fire weapons into the heads of these animals would be ridiculous, if not impossible. And apart from endangering yourself, shooting yourself literally in the foot in the process.
Another peculiar fact of this phenomena is that it is not just farm animals that are at risk. Wild animals, birds and sea animals are also victims. I have heard it said that some farmers spot unusual lights in the sky when this activity takes place. Have you any knowledge of that?
Yes, a number of farmers have actually said that they've seen helicopters, or sometimes even unconventional types of helicopters, that operate in the most unusual ways over the farmland, and in the morning they will find animals that have been killed in this manner. A number of farmers have actually reported coming across covert troops actually on the ground.
Right.
And also a number of farmers have given permission for exercises to be conducted on their land. And sometimes in connection to that, animals are found in some ways killed and mutilated. But there seems to be a degree of unusualness about some of the activity. Sometimes the farmers themselves are quite, you know, aware of the helicopter activity in the area, because we've got one of the largest bases of Rath Shawbury, which is local to us. Right. And so there's an enormous amount of helicopter activity. But some of these lights don't conform always like helicopters' flight characteristics.
Okay. And could you expand on that? Are they silent or?
Well, a number of them are not only silent, they stay stationary for maybe an hour or more, and there are described as being a single sphere of red or white. Some farmers have actually used binoculars to view these lights, because they've been so concerned or puzzled by them.
Okay, so are you saying that possibly these lights are not conventional aircraft then?
Well, they wouldn't appear to be conventional in the normal sense of the word. We do know that a number of helicopters have got a stealthing ability on the rotors, so they're virtually quiet. But the farmers say that sometimes they use binoculars to try and identify these lights, and they appear as a red or a white sphere with no anti-collision or normal navigation lights. So they're not totally consistent with normal helicopters, and they do seem to hover for quite extended periods of time. And usually, if they see the lights, then animals are found mutilated in the morning or the following days.
In my interview with Linda Moulton Howe, she gives a compelling explanation.
And then you come to what Sheriff Tex Graves told me that day in September of 1979, as I was just starting out trying to get to the bottom of what was happening. He said, I'm convinced that what we're dealing with are creatures from outer space.
Okay.
And he said that to me, eye to eye, and when I said, would you please talk to me about this in front of my television camera, because you know I am working on a documentary and I need this for television, he said no.
Right.
And I heard off the record from many people in law enforcement that this was their personal opinion based on the fact that they had seen beams of light coming out of circles of light in the sky. Some people had actually seen animals rise in beams of light. I set up an appointment with the chief investigator of the animal mutilation phenomenon for the district attorney's office in Trinidad, Colorado. His name was Lou Giraudo, and I remember the eeriness of it. We had been traveling and hearing all of these spooky stories. We were seeing and filming animals with these excisions that were bloodless and no tracks and no explanation, and law enforcement is telling me off the record we're dealing with creatures from outer space. who or what do you think is killing and mutilating all of these animals? And Lou Girodo, without missing a beat, without flinching, and without taking his eye away, looked straight at me and said, well, other investigators and I have come to the conclusion that we are dealing with creatures from outer space. And this is with the camera running.
To back up these claims, Linda recalls a conversation she had with American Army Intelligence Lieutenant Philip Corso.
Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso and I got to talk privately, and he had already read some of my work about my animal mutilation investigations, which surprised me, but he said, you are absolutely right. Everything you've reported is accurate. And he said, when I was working in the Pentagon for the General Arthur Trudeau, handpicked by President Dwight Eisenhower, in the Pentagon, I read with my own eyes highly classified United States government documents about the unusual deaths, bloodless and trackless deaths of animals around the world in both hemispheres. And it stated in the documents that the perpetrators were extraterrestrial biological entities, and that the documents were dated as early as 1951. He wanted me to know. That is the answer.
We'd like to ask for your input. Share your opinion and expertise with us in the comments after watching the video. If you're a subscriber, you'll always get a heart from us as a small thank you, and we'll pin your important post to the top where everyone will read it first. Just make sure you've already subscribed, like the video, and mention both at the beginning of your comment.